central part of our lives, and sexuality being such a central and, I may put it this way, delicate part of our identities. And this part of our lives where, in many ways, our greatest joys and our greatest sorrows can accrue. Maybe our greatest joys accrue there because our greatest sorrows can accrue there, and vice versa. Right? And it's a central element of identity, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it. And I think it's a great thing that we're talking about it here at the end of your fall freshman term, when probably many of you have thought about issues of sexuality a lot, and we certainly addressed issues of relationships quite a lot in our classes. Our speaker today is Professor Dr. Deb Kindy. She's a beloved friend of the FOE program because she taught in the program for a number of years, and she is a professor of nursing and herself a registered nurse. She has a PhD in nursing from the University of Arizona. She's a highly, highly regarded professor here, teaching courses in nursing, and also taught for a lot of years the Nursing 480 class, the class in human sexuality. Are you still
No.
Not so much.
Spring.
While Deb was teaching it was one of the most sought-after courses on the curriculum, I can tell you that. So she holds many areas of expertise in nursing, particularly in care and research, including issues of combating stigma around mental illness, qualitative methodologies in nursing, and of course human sexuality. Please give a very warm welcome to her.
First of all, I said this last year, I'm going to say it again this year. You may know it by now, but you are being taught and mentored by the very best, and they so have your back. They are so in your corner. Take advantage of that. It's really special, and it's a little uncommon. All right, are you ready to talk about sex? I have to tell you, I'm not shy about it. I'm sex positive, which doesn't mean I have a positive STI. It means I have a positive view of sex. So I'm open to your questions, and are you ready? Are you ready to talk about it? A little? Okay. Okay. So this is what we're going to do today. Am I too loud? Is this coming across too loud? I heard a yeah and a no. Okay. Somewhere in the middle. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about today. Number one, how comfortable we are as the human race with human sexuality. You hear about it a lot, and yet there's a lot of stigma attached to it. So we're going to take a little bit of look at that, and we're going to look at what some of your colleagues have to say about it. We're going to talk about the historical forces of structure and agency that have kind of shaped our view of human sexuality. I'm going to get into the biology of human sexuality a little bit. And then question number 4 there. What relationship does your sexual identity have with the many other components in your identity? And what is your sexual identity? Does it inform your other identity, or does sexuality, is it a reciprocal process innate to you? So we're going to start with a warm-up here. This is Julia Sweeney talking about the talk.
I have a daughter, Mulan, and when she was 8 last year, she was doing a report for school, or she had some homework about frogs, and we were at this restaurant, and frogs lay eggs, and the eggs turn into tadpoles, and tadpoles turn into frogs. And I said, yeah, I'm not really up on my frog reproduction that much. It's the females, I think, that lay the eggs, and then the males fertilize them. And then they become tadpoles and frogs. And she says, what? Only the females have eggs? And I said, yeah. And she goes, and what's this fertilizing? So I kind of said, oh, it's this extra ingredient, that you need to create a new frog from the mom and dad frog. And she said, oh, so is that true for humans too? And I thought, okay, here we go. I didn't know it would happen so quick at 8. I was trying to remember all the guidebooks, and all I could remember was only answer the question they're asking. Don't give any more information. So I said, yes. And she said, and where do human women, like where do women lay their eggs? And I said, well, funny you should ask. We have evolved to have our own pond. We have our very own pond inside our bodies. And we lay our eggs there. We don't have to worry about other eggs or anything like that. It's our own pond, and that's how it happens. And she goes, and how do they get fertilized? And I said, well, men through their penis, they fertilize the eggs by the sperm coming out, and you go through the woman's vagina. And so we're just eating, and her jaw just drops, and she goes, Mom, like where you go to the bathroom? And I said, I know. It's how we evolved. It does seem odd. It is a little bit like having a waste treatment plant right next to an amusement park. Bad zoning. But she's like, what? And she goes, but Mom, but men and women can't ever see each other naked, Mom, so how could that ever happen? And then I go, well, and then I'm like, put my Margaret Mead hat on. Human males and females develop a special bond, and when they're much older than you, and they have a very special feeling, then they can be naked together. And she said, Mom, have you done this before? And I said, yes. And she said, but Mom, you can't have kids, because she knows I adopted her and that I can't have kids. And I said, yes. And she said, well, you don't have to do that again. And I said, and then she said, but how does it happen when a man and woman are together? Like, how do they know that's the time? Mom, does the man just say, is now the time to take off my pants? And I said, yes. That is exactly right. Exactly how it happens. So then we're driving home, and she's looking out the window, and she goes, Mom, what if just two people saw each other in the street, like a man and woman, they just started doing it? Would that ever happen? And I said, oh, no, humans are so private. Oh. And then she goes, what if there was like a party, and there was just like a whole bunch of girls and a whole bunch of boys, and there's a bunch of men and women, and they just started doing it, Mom? Would that ever happen? And I said, oh, no. It's not how we do it. Then we got home, and we see the cat, and she goes, Mom, how do cats do it? And I go, oh, it's the same. It's basically the same. And then she got all caught up in the legs. But how would their legs go, Mom? I don't understand the legs. And I was like, she goes, Mom, everyone can't do the splits. And I go, I know, but the legs, I'm like, the legs get worked out. And she goes, but I just can't understand it. So I go, why don't we go on the internet, and maybe we can see, like on Wikipedia. So we go online, and we put in cats mating. And unfortunately, on YouTube, there's many cats mating videos. And we watch them, and I'm so thankful, because she's just like, wow, this is so amazing. She goes, what about dogs? So we put in dogs mating, and we're watching it, and she's totally absorbed. And then she goes, Mom, do you think they would have on the internet any humans mating? And then I realized that I have taken my little 8-year-old's hand and taken her right into internet porn. And I looked into this trusting, loving face, and I said, oh, no. That would never happen. Thank you. Thank you.
So, the definition of human sexuality I am going to use today is sex-related feelings, behaviors, attractions, your identity. And all of this, of course, is experienced through this filter of social structure, which is our culture, our laws, medicine, politics, religion, social and economic strata. Human experiences of sexuality can range from the divine ecstasy to complete annihilation and criminality. In Oscar Wilde, you saw sex used for pleasure and for self-confirmation, but you also saw it used to establish status, subjugation, power, manipulation, control, procreation, and for profit. And Into the Forest, you saw sex used as an attraction, as a normal human attraction to each other. You also saw it used criminally, and you saw it used for healing, although in a somewhat unorthodox manner, but it is a form of sexual healing. Okay, so this is what you're exposed to all the time. This is what the media puts forward as sex in our society, and you've seen this since you were young. If you take a look at this, first of all, how many female heads do you see? About 4 of them are covered, except for the one open mouth, which is supposed to represent a receptacle, I'm assuming. And these are advertisements for BMW, men's clothing, shower gel, all kinds of things. That link at the bottom, I'm going to send this PowerPoint to your instructors, so you can click on that link if you want. It's actually a blog about male sexual objectification, and you can see the male there holding up salad dressing of all things. So he's selling salad dressing, and it's kind of interesting that PETA would have that as an advertisement for them. But you're exposed to this all the time in your lives. So, yes, this happens all the time, but we're not really very comfortable talking about human sexuality at all. Think about the number of words we have for breasts, for sexual intercourse, for vaginas, for penises. I mean, tons and tons of words. And how many words do we have for an arm or a leg? Not very many, right? All right. So in the Nursing 480 class, which I taught for about 13 or 14 years, I did surveys every week. And I'm going to show you the results from 4 of the questions on a 1-week survey. These represent, the statistics I'm going to show you represent about 300 juniors and seniors here at Sonoma State University. So this is something that was written just last year. These last few weeks have been the first time my parents have hesitantly discussed sexuality with me, junior or senior here. I practiced my part of the group presentation in front of them, and while my father was especially awkward at first, it really opened a door for discussion that was previously closed. I think it's a shame that they felt so awkward about it in the past, because I could have used their insight growing up. Remember that when you, if and when you have kids. Okay, question. How old were you when you first learned about sexual intercourse? And as you can see, most people were between 10 and 12, but 6 to 9 was the second highest. And there were more people who learned about it at the age of 5 than at 15 or 16. But we're still not talking about it. From whom or what did you first hear about sexual intercourse? Friends was the big winner. Movies was number 2, and that's pretty scary. School personnel number 3, and parents were 4th, but parents were less than half of what friends were in terms of learning about this. So, you learned about it. How factual and correct was the content you got? And as you can see, the majority said they had partially accurate information. Although it was a small difference, at least accurate was a little higher than grossly inaccurate. All right, when you first learned about sexual intercourse, how did you feel about it? And the big winners were curious and a little awkward. Weird came in number 3rd, and that might represent maybe some of the inaccurate information people got. And I really hope that the can't remembers aren't the result of traumatic amnesia. I hope it's the result of it not being a big deal. So why is human sexuality so hard to talk about? It's how we all got here. We're sexual beings from the time of conception. Sex hormones constantly influence our behaviors, our anatomy, our physiology, our cognitions, our emotions. And for most of us, sex is an innately powerful source of pleasure and expression of love. So history can often inform human dilemmas, and we're going to take a little look at history here and some of the changes we've seen. But how do you think sex-related attitudes and beliefs and values have evolved? Do you think it's that first one? We came from uninformed at the prehistoric times, and we're slowly making progress to enlightenment. Or do you think it's more like the figure on the right? So how many vote for the figure on the left, uninformed to more enlightened? A few. And how many vote for the figure on the right? A lot of you. Okay. So from a global sense, there are really two basic schools of thought. The first is metaphysical sexual pessimism. And from this perspective or this worldview, sexual desire always objectifies the other person. It results in a loss of self-control, and I say, thank you for that, and I want a hallelujah for orgasms. Let's hear it. Come on. Yeah. That was not very enthusiastic, but I'll take it. All right. But because of the loss of self-control and the believed objectification of other people, sex is thus degrading and should never, ever, ever be enjoyed. Sex is sanctioned only within a heterosexual marriage and only for procreation. Other forms have to be rigorously constrained. And then we have metaphysical sexual optimism. Sex is powerful and it achieves its value in context. Sexual pleasure is conducive to our well-being, and the nature of sexual activity can be deeply mutually bonding and spiritual. So think about these influences on you, on the world, on the people who inhabit this planet, and think about how these views may have affected people that we're going to look at through history. Also think about the effect on self-esteem and ultimately citizenship in this world. So biblically, it seems to be sanctioned in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And from the Song of Songs, or also called the Song of Solomon, the bridegroom says, how fair is thy love, my bride? How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all manner of spices. Thy lips, O my bride, drip honey, honey and milk are under thy tongue. The bride says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is towards me. Notice there's no reciprocal ownership there, but still, it's a good thought. Come, my beloved, let's go forth into the field, let's lodge in the villages, and there I will give you my love. It doesn't say anything about the SSU library, but it does talk about fields and villages. Okay, then on the other hand, we have Paul of Tarsus, who emphasized the importance of overcoming desires of the flesh, and he associated spirituality with celibacy and being unmarried. Bishop Augustine declared lust was the original sin of Adam and Eve. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in Ohio, childhood basically in the 50s, and I had a lot of brethren ministers in my family. So I thought lust was I thought it was right up there with murder. I thought it was the most horrible thing ever. Until I actually looked it up and I found out that lust means pleasure, delight, and a desire to gratify the senses. So, although lust was the original sin of Adam and Eve, I'm not sure how that fits into be fruitful and multiply. I'm not sure how that was supposed to work. But anyway, females were subordinate to males, thus the man had to be on top and all other positions were considered unnatural. Research indicates that male preference is for the cowboy or cowgirl position, so there's a little problem with that one. All right. If you don't know what cowgirl position is, Google it. Middle Ages, this was a time of great structure. Sex was to be only for procreation, and anything else was a crime against nature. There was great concern about men secretly in league with the devil to impregnate barnyard animals. The age of consent was 10 years old. 10 years old. It's prior to puberty. There was a virgin-whore dichotomy, and I believe that that dichotomy exists today, and some places more than others, but it's still pretty strong. Virgin Mary considered pure and absolutely uninterested in sex. Eve was the evil temptress, and there were witch hunts for so-called carnal knowledge and orgies with the devil. That occurred over about 200 years, and about 50,000 women were burned as the result of that. Withdrawal to avoid pregnancy required a penance of bread and water for years. Maybe not be quite as bad as burning, although maybe, I don't know, maybe it is. There's an ongoing debate among experts in this country, real experts in sexology, and it's whether or not males and females have the same sex drive, or if females have less of a sex drive. And when you do some research into this, you'll find that really some of the top authorities in the field really disagree on it. But it also kind of makes you wonder if there hasn't been a systematic destruction of females who have stronger sex drives over the ages. I don't know. So enter the Age of Enlightenment, which was about the 16th to the 18th century. Martin Luther and John Calvin modified views of human sexuality, and they introduced scientific rationalism, which sounds a bit like critical thinking, right? All right, in addition to reproduction, marital sex was condoned to lighten and ease the cares and sadnesses of household affairs, or to endure each other. A Puritan man was expelled from Boston because he denied conjugal fellowship unto his wife for the space of 2 years. We tend to think of Puritans as these really uptight people, but maybe not quite as much as we've been led to believe. Mary Wollstonecraft was really quite extraordinary for her time. In 1792, she wrote The Vindication of Women's Rights. And in that book, she attacked limits placed on females, particularly with respect to education. She asserted that sexual satisfaction was every bit as important to women as it was to men. Imagine that. Marital and extramarital sex was not sinful, and she had a relatively famous daughter. Does anybody know who she was? Okay, her name was Mary Shelley. Does anybody know what she wrote? Yes, Frankenstein. So that was a step forward, but then we entered the Victorian era, which was a step backwards. Women were seen as fragile. They were constrained by rules, corsets, bustles, and hoops, and I want you to take a look at what those corsets did to internal organs there on the right-hand corner. William Acton, a physician, said the majority of women are not very much troubled with sexual feelings of any kind. And I would contend that's because there was no blood getting to the genitals with the corsets on. Sexual and emotional distance between husbands and wives was expected. Husbands were allowed to smoke, drink, joke, go out. Wives were to be virtuous and have absolutely no interest in sex. So of course prostitution flourished. It was actually encouraged at that time for men. But for those of you who think men had it easy, enter masturbation panic. And this was directed mostly at men because, of course, women weren't supposed to have any sexual feelings. So John Harvey Kellogg of Kellogg's Corn Flakes and Sylvester Graham of Graham Crackers reported that 40 ounces of blood were lost with each male ejaculation. Now, folks, this jar holds 32 ounces. I wanted to fill it with water with red food coloring in it, but I used all my red food coloring last year, so it's just an empty jar, but it's big. Okay. Kellogg ran the Battle Creek Sanitarium, and Graham was a minister. These are some of the things that were said about masturbation at the time. This solitary vice of self-pollution caused cancer of the womb, urinary diseases, nocturnal emissions, impotence, cholera, plague, epilepsy, insanity, feeble-mindedness, and ultimately death. Such a victim literally dies by his own hands. Dr. Adam Clark noted neither the plague Nor war, nor smallpox, nor similar diseases have produced results so disastrous to humanity as the pernicious habit of onanism. Sex was only to be for conception and absolutely no more than once a month. I mean, yeah. So we now know, research substantiates that frequent ejaculations, that's several per week, actually reduce male rates of prostate cancer. I've spared you the pictures of the anti-masturbation devices. They're pretty gruesome, but you can Google them and think slasher movie when you do. And at the bottom here, we have a man dying, representing the last stage of mental and bodily exhaustion from self-pollution. Pale, spent, vacant eyes because he has no blood left. And about this same time, we have Anthony Comstock, who's head of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. He established the Comstock Act in 1873. This was also known as an Act for the Suppression of Trade in and Circulation of Obscene Literature and Articles of Immoral Use. That's generally referring to birth control, although it didn't have that name at the time. He criminalized premarital sex, and we think we have crowded prisons now. I can't imagine what it must have been like then. Birth control and adultery, all of those things were criminalized. At the same time, maybe just a little bit further down the road, Sigmund Freud in Europe was saying the sex drive is a fundamental force in human psychology, and that abstinence is unnatural and actually harmful to people. Reich, also in Europe, said orgasms cure neuroses and that genital stagnation leads to emotional and physical problems. This slide, which you're going to get this PowerPoint, it lists all the great things, all the great physiological things and psychological things that orgasms and masturbations do for human beings. And then we have Margaret Sanger, who is absolutely one of my all-time heroes. She was a woman of formidable agency. You can see her mother's history there. It affected her deeply, as did her work as a nurse on New York's Lower East Side, where she saw the toll of multiple unwanted pregnancies on poor immigrant women. She got the fire as the result of that, and she began defying the laws of the country, and she went to France and she brought back condoms, and she really began a search in earnest for what would become known as the birth control pill. She was she was arrested on multiple occasions. She spent 30 days in jail at one time. But she linked up with a physician, and eventually that birth control did come about, that birth control pill did come about, and in 1944 she founded what is now known as Planned Parenthood. So the late 1800s to the 1940s, the suffrage movement occurred. I don't know how much you know about that, but prior to the suffrage movement, women could not vote, they could not attend universities, and they could not own property because they were property. In World War I and II, things began to change because men went overseas, women had to move out into the job world, and men became exposed to more open sexuality in Europe, which still exists today. Europe is more open about human sexuality than we are here in this country. Automobiles came about, and automobiles provided privacy and a place for sexual exploration that wasn't in the front parlor of your parents' house. And movies began to present romance and sex symbols. Close contact dancing occurred in the Roaring '20s, and in 1948, penicillin was mass-produced to treat STIs. And you can see that thing over there, it says syphilis, all of these men have it, and right underneath it in little print it says women stay away from dance halls. Okay, so post-World War II, that was somewhat of a step forward, then we stepped back again. So we are doing that little curlicue thing here in this country. Post-World War II, the mid-1940s to the 1950s, it was a time of really great repression, but it was also a breeding ground for great change. Men came home from the war and traditional roles resumed. Women who enjoyed working out of the home wanted to continue that, and those who really pushed for it were labeled as neurotic or having penis envy. Husbands who grew tired of hearing about this could actually have their wives locked away in mental institutions, and the diagnosis given at that time was hysteria. Gay men returning from the war, however, began to establish a biker culture and leather bars. Christina Jorgensen had a widely publicized male-to-female sex reassignment. Kinsey, another one of my heroes, he was a sex researcher out of Indiana University, and he did a lot of sex research, and he published about women's sexual interests and response, same-sex sexual behaviors, masturbation, and novel sex acts. For this, he was accused of being subversive, a communist, and that came from physicians, from clergymen, from politicians, and from the press. They thought it was shocking content. So at the same time social conformity was being emphasized, the first Playboy over there in the right-hand corner was published. My undergraduate work was at Indiana University, and I could not wait to get into the Kinsey Institute. But you couldn't just walk in. You had to have a reason. So the first chance I got to choose my paper topic, I chose laws around sexuality in this country. So I actually got to go into the Institute. And if you ever have a chance to do it, it's quite amazing. And the research there, the volumes and volumes of research, of art, of all kinds of things are really great. There's also a great link online for accessing information of any kind about human sexuality. If you Google Kinsey Confidential, you can get that, and that's a place you can go to ask questions and get good answers. Okay, the 60s and the 70s, the sexual revolution, which Reich, back then when we were talking about Sigmund Freud and Reich, he called for that revolution in 1923. So multiple forms of birth control became legal within marriage, and I think it was about 1976 single women were allowed to legally access birth control. Woodstock culminated the free love movement. The American Psychiatric Association decided homosexuality wasn't really a mental disorder. The Stonewall riots began the LGBT movement, which is now the LGBTQIA movement. California became the first state to classify forced sex within marriage as rape. Prior to that, a husband had every right to rape his wife. Some key sexually oriented publications came about at that time. Masters and Johnson. Did any of you watch that series, Masters and Johnson series? Some of you? It was good. Women were deemed capable of having orgasms as well as men, and I might add multiple orgasms. Sex therapy was known as a legitimate endeavor. Our Bodies, Ourselves, and For Yourself, The Fulfillment of Female Sexuality was published in 1975, and it really helped women's sexual self-awareness. And Alex Comfort published The Joy of Sex, which discussed and illustrated diverse sexual behaviors among couples. So here we are, 1980s to 2015. HIV/AIDS diagnoses prompted both positive and negative results, public responses. Abstinence-only education resulted in increased teen STI and pregnancies, and we still, among industrialized countries, we still have some of the highest rates of teen STIs and teen pregnancies among industrialized countries. We are really very uncomfortable in this country with adolescent sexuality. HIV/AIDS prophylaxis is now available. It's called Truvada. It is effective. It is a prophylactic. You generally don't take it after, although there's a really short window you can take it after. But it's about 92% effective when taken as prescribed. It costs a lot of money, and I'm not sure who can afford it, but it's there. It's there and accessible. Legalization of same-sex marriage has just occurred. We still have a long way to go. Transgender and intersex rights and equality, it's still a battle. It's an ongoing battle. And I think in the future we're going to see legitimization of polyamory and a recognition of asexuality. And I hope we're going to come to terms, or better terms, with adolescent sexuality. So we still have a long way to go, but we're getting there. I want to do just a quick look at the biology and how it actually, in some ways, dictates our sexual identity and our sexual orientation. So biological sex differentiation. You probably all know that a gene on the X chromosome starts ovarian development in the fetus, and a gene on the Y chromosome starts testes development in the fetus. So we know then that physiological sex differentiation occurs from conception to birth, and it's throughout adolescence as well. While most of us have standard male and female parts, like most everything else in life, there are a lot of variations. We know that there are over 70 different types of missing or extra sex chromosome possibilities. Two examples of those are Turner syndrome, and you can look those up online, and Klinefelter syndrome. But again, more than 70. Biological sex and hormones. So developing ovaries and testes in the fetus begins at about 8 weeks gestation. That's in utero. And it's a primary, although not the only, but it's the primary determinant of adult sexual identity. Lots of variations can occur in this process as well. Some examples are insensitivity or hypersensitivity of the fetus to prenatal androgens. They can, those androgens can feminize, or lack of androgens can feminize a fetus, and the androgens themselves can masculine or do masculinize a fetus. And that is an anatomical, physiological, and ultimately behavioral thing that occurs. It's not just a biology in the uterus and then the baby's born and all the nurture starts to occur. It's set in utero. The fetus also may not be equipped to convert some of those androgens to the different forms they need to be converted to. So another way that interference can occur. So is sexual identity a result of nurture, or is it a result of nature? There was a man, he was actually a very well-respected psychologist at Johns Hopkins University, and he was an authority on gender identity issues, and he believed that children were born without a predisposition to sexual identity and that it could be conditioned. So David Reimer, whose picture is there, his penis was destroyed during a circumcision at the time of birth. And you know what, folks? I hope your generation takes a look at circumcision. You only need to watch one circumcision to know that it really hurts. So take a look at that. Anyway, Money suggested that surgical reassignment is the way to go, that Brenda's penis just be simply removed and that she be restructured as a female. So that was done. Parents were then to raise this individual as Brenda. It was widely reported as a success, so other people began copying that method. A sexologist and journalist, however, found Brenda, and this is the real story of Brenda's life. He rebelled at every stage of development. He changed his name from Brenda to David at the age of 15. He had reparative surgery, but with limited function. He married and adopted children, and he died by suicide at the age of 38. So I think the take home for us is it's really important to identify our assumptions, and we all carry tons of assumptions with us all the time, and we don't know we have them a lot of times. So work on identifying your assumptions, and then work on finding objective evidence for your opinions. So when a person is intersex, what is their sexual identity? I'm not going to open this link for you, but you have it. It's a great link, and it's people talking about, who are intersex, talking about their sexual identity. So I'm just going to give you a little smidgen of sexual diversity in non-human life forms. We know that 2009 meta-analysis of research noted that same-sex sex is nearly universal across species. Albatross, some scientists watching several hundred nests of albatross began noticing that fully a third of the nests were occupied by 2 females. They couldn't figure out how those eggs got fertilized, so they watched closely, and they found out that one of those females would run out just long enough to get fertilized and then hop back in the nest. Clownfish, when a female pair of clownfish, of a clownfish pair die, the male turns into a she. Dolphins in adolescence, the males will mount each other, and they do this as a bonding exercise and to create cooperation for the seduction of females a little later down the road. On the other hand, male dung flies mount each other to wear each other out, so there's less competition. Most mammals have multiple sex partners, and how many of you have watched bonobos at the zoo? Anybody? Ooh, it's quite an experience. They greet each other with mutual masturbation. They're largely bisexual. And I don't know, but it seems to me, maybe as a last resort, mutual masturbation might be an answer to world peace instead of some of the problems we have. So we humans, yes, we have a lot of variety, but we have not as much as in the non-human world. So sex occurs in spectrum. Biological sex, a spectrum, male, female, and intersexed. Sexual orientation, also a spectrum, and it's largely context-driven. So females on one end, attracted to females, attracted to males, and in the middle, bisexual, pansexual, which means attracted to all people, and asexual, meaning no sexual attraction. Despite recent gains in acceptance and normalization of sexual orientation variations, do consider this. Suicide rates are still 30 to 35% higher among adolescents who identify as gay or lesbian, and about 60% higher for adolescents who identify as trans. We're lucky to be here in California, and we're lucky to have CAPS and the hub here as well. There's a great organization in Santa Rosa called Positive Images, if you're interested. So to wrap up here, how am I doing? A couple of questions. Gender identity and sexual orientation are established very early in life, most prenatally. Therefore, should we dictate who someone is allowed to love or how people sexually express themselves if their loving and sexual expression are risk-aware, consensual, and non-exploitive? Those 3 words are key, and if you take nothing home but that from this lecture, I will be really happy. If you're ever in question about a sexual activity, evaluate it. Is it risk-aware, consensual, and non-exploitive? So is it a violation of fundamental human personhood to attempt to forcefully change someone's sexual identity or orientation? And does the problem lie with the person, or does it lie with society? Sexual health, I'm going to just run through that real quick. Get to, regarding learning about sex, this is another quote from the class. Man, it was a wild ride, but it all sorts out in the end after so much awkward confusion, pain, pleasure, and fear. It's everyone's personal process, and on their own terms, they will find their way. And I have one last final thing for you. Your personal sexual evolution doesn't have to stop at graduation, and it doesn't have to ever stop. With a good dose of personal responsibility, sustained desire, health, and deep connection with yourself or with others, sex can be an increasingly profound, indescribable, unimaginable, lifelong source of pleasure, well-being, and meaning, and I'm really not kidding about that. That's it. Thank you. Oh, that's a really great question. It's somebody who has absolutely no interest in sex at all. It doesn't mean they're minus the organs. It just means there's no interest there. They would prefer just to live their lives without. I had a student who was asexual a couple years ago in class, and something I'd never really considered. I learned a great deal from her. It was interesting.
One more question. What do you think schools should do to better educate kids about sex?
I think, this is what I think. I think that parents have the responsibility to introduce sex early on as a normal, natural function in life, as a healthy function in life. I think schools have the responsibility to teach the specific, the anatomy, the physiology, the STI, the self-protection, and some of those things. So when, you know, we have kids getting pregnant in the 5th and 6th grade, and we're not teaching it early enough. If it's a natural thing, if it's not stigmatized the way we stigmatize it, then I think it can very easily move into lives of parents and children and the educational system. That's what I think. And you know what? The more you talk about sex, the more you use the words, the easier it becomes. And in that 480 class, every single person in the class had to do a pretty sexually explicit, as a group, but each one had to present, component of human sexuality. And by the end of the class, people were comfortable, really comfortable. So just practice. Yes?
Would you like to say a little bit about the roundtable?
Oh, yes. I am going to, Annette is a friend, has been a friend, and has been coming here for about 13 years. She has lived her life as both a man and a woman, and she'll talk to you about that experience. At the round table, right. At 4 in Amici's. Oh, thank you. Thank you.